Today, it's a very special day we are having. First of all, we have Dr. Martin Wansleben, freshly coming from Berlin, the CEO of the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And as it's usually our AHK night talk, we changed it to the AHK day talk. As you can see, it's still bright, but we couldn't fit it differently into our schedule. Welcome, Mr. Wansleben.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Wansleben, we always kick off this interview with 10 questions. And normally, as you are my boss, you set the rules. But today, I will set the rules because you can only answer with yes or no. Is that okay for you?
Appreciate it.
Let's start. First question. Has China changed since your last visit in 2019?
Yes.
Have Sino-German relations improved since your last visit?
No.
Very good. Is the world in a deglobalization phase?
Yes.
Is de-risking and decoupling the same thing?
No.
Can we understand decoupling as a fundamental threat for the business model of the German economy?
Yes.
Will Germany's economy recover next year?
Yes.
Is Germany still one of the most innovative countries in the world?
Yes.
Will Sino-German relations significantly change within the next 5 years?
Yes.
Will China be still Germany's biggest trading partner in 5 years?
Yes.
Does traveling to China inspire you?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I could see that it is difficult, and I believe that China is quite difficult because it doesn't matter whom you ask, you will always get a different answer. And therefore, I'm happy that I can ask you some questions today, and let's see what your opinion is. First of all, 2019, I remember very well, the world was still okay. You visited us in Hong Kong and in Shenzhen, and I also remember you were quite inspired about the speed, the innovation you experienced in China. And then 3 months later, the world has changed. COVID didn't allow you to come to China, and I know you like to travel to China, but now you are here in 2023. How do you perceive China now? And you come to China for decades. What has changed since your last visit?
We are now living in a totally different world. Since the Russian war to Ukraine, trust is tremendously decreasing, nearly lost in global world. And this lack of trust increases tremendously the transaction costs of communicating, of international politics, and of course of international trading. And then COVID pandemic. We saw that supply chains could be interrupted totally, and we had to realize a general risk now very concretely. And this has changed totally the attitude, how companies have to meet the challenges of international trade, of international supply chains. And this has also huge repercussions for international policies. Trust or mistrust, transaction costs, wars, conflicts, different interests, and unfortunately, as one of the consequences, kind of tendency to look into the inner side of the nations or the regions and not so very much on the outer side. And all this against the background of climate, environmental questions, demographic developments who are totally different in different countries, but also challenging. So it's a difficult and unfortunately also dangerous mixture.
And I remember when you came 2019, we already had some challenges in the relations globally, but also coming to the Sino-German relationships. In the last 4 years, did this Sino-German relations and we're talking mainly about economy now. Has it changed?
We couldn't travel. We couldn't talk to each other directly. The consequence was that there was a tendency to talk about each other, not to each other. That is a huge difference. And coming now back finally to China, I personally feel the difference. To see the people, to talk to them, to discuss with them, to have dinner or lunch with them. It's a totally different feeling of togetherness.
Yeah. And maybe even it doesn't change the trust issue completely, but it definitely increases the understanding for each other.
What I fortunately feel is that a lot of Chinese, the same on our side, feel that it's better to talk to each other and to cooperate. And this is what encouraged me tremendously. I'm very grateful for that.
Mr. Wansleben, we don't have a better discussion partner than you when it comes to German company sentiment. What is the current sentiment of German business towards China?
They know the potential of the market, the size of the market, the innovativeness of the market, the relevance of the market. They know that China must be, it's an imperative, must be a relevant actor when it comes to solve the questions who are on the table, decarbonization, health policy and technique, migration. So they know it, but they know, or they have to tackle the different risk constellation. And I very well remember when I was first time in Guangzhou, 2003, there was a representative of a huge German company, and he told me he came from South America to China, and he said, it's such a difference. When I was in South America, I had to find for every money I need to expand the business. And now here in China, I go to my management board and I said, I need money, and they are asking not more. And this has tremendously changed now. China has developed tremendously when it comes to economic power and all that stuff. So it's now a different market, it's a different partner, but the risk constellation is also there. So the companies have to decide, where do I invest? Not only to get the better business for the day, but also to diversify the supply chain. So this is a totally different approach. And of course, there is the international politically dominated discussion how to estimate which country. So it's not only China, but this is also true for other relevant markets on the world.
Yeah. I asked you at the beginning, is there a difference between decoupling and de-risking? And you answered no. I think we have to be a little bit careful with these two words because it's totally different meanings. But maybe you can elaborate on that. What is the difference between decoupling and de-risking?
Decoupling would be stopping to talk to you tonight or today. Totally stop. De-risking is something different. But we have to differ between the political use of the expressions and what it means for companies. We are talking now for companies. Decoupling means we don't do business in a market. De-risking is we set up a risk management, we write down the opportunities of the market, we write down the risks of the market, and we try to balance it out. So when I do have a huge market, but I'm not able to ensure that I can deliver what I promised to my customers, it's a problem for me. against the experiences we have done so far in the pandemic period of time, or with Russia attack to Ukraine, we know now that supply chains can be interrupted. So when I go to China, I have to take into account which risks can influence my supply chains, with which probability. And now I have to make my decisions. Do I produce only in China to cover all the needs I have to meet doing business in China? Where can I get my spare parts from? Is it from Europe? Is it from the US? Is it from India? Is it from Vietnam? So this is now much more complicated. And the next step is what I have to take into account when we presume that so far the supply chains had been economically optimal, and I choose now another way, it's more costly. Yeah. So I have to pay kind of insurance fee to make it less risky to do business not only in China but elsewhere. This is true for all markets we do have. So the situation of the companies have totally changed because they are asked not only by their people, not only by their customers, but also by the banks, by the insurance companies, and of course by the politicians or by the public opinion, which is relevant for all companies where they are located.
Yeah, I think another risk, talking about de-risking or decoupling, is deglobalization. And I also ask you, are we in a phase of deglobalization? Maybe you can elaborate on that, on where we are when it comes to deglobalization, and especially what it means for an economy like Germany, who is so export-driven.
Yeah, for example, Germany produces much more cars than we could drive as Germans. Yeah. So we are depending on having foreign customers. And we are used to produce a lot of products and services in Germany and exporting them. So we are depending on having open borders. We are depending on having people traveling around. We are depending on having people living in other countries, being the face to the customers, being the face to the suppliers. So this is the constellation so far. When it comes to deglobalization, that means the borders are not so free. It's not so fashionable to travel around. It's not so easy living abroad. If you can put it as in an economic sense, the transaction costs of doing business worldwide are rising tremendously. And that means the profit the companies can make is shrinking, and in the consequences we are losing jobs and so on. So our wealth is in danger, if you want to say so. And the promise now that even in Europe, the constellation of the different countries are totally different. One is more depending on exports than the other. For example, this is a classical difference of interest between France and Germany, for example. This is typical, or between Germany and Spain. And what we have now to do is to balance it out. Okay, the political situation in the world has tremendously, unfortunately, changed, not to the better, therefore unfortunately. And now we have to balance out the political necessities. Of course, politics have to address highly relevant and very difficult political issues on the one side, and business has to balance it out. What can we do, which means the acceptance of the investors, of our customers in Germany, in Europe, worldwide, What can I do to get money from the banks and so on. So the situation is totally different. And the more we are going into decoupling, the more difficult it will become. And a decoupled world is economically a disaster for Germany.
Yeah, and Germany is also special when it comes to the economy structure, because we are mainly driven by family-owned businesses. Many, and you've met yesterday a lot of companies who said we exist for 120 years, etc. So the crisis we are in will not be the last, because overall economy is not as booming as in other years. What I want to point out is, if we look a little bit longer than maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years, where would you see the Sino-German relations in 10 years?
Future is always open, so it depends. What I feel coming back to China after 4 years is there are a lot of people who are feeling the repercussions of the political tensions, of the decoupling indicators, of the period of time of pandemic, and they have now the feeling might be better to collaborate again. Mm-hmm. So there is each power in one direction creates a power in the other direction. And I'm very much hoping that we make the experiences, that we are able to learn from it, and that we are able to find the next better step. The world or the individual life is not a construction which you can develop in advance to the end of life. But we are entitled to always to look for the next step. And I have the feeling, when we heard what was said also from official side, from China and from Chinese side and from German side, that there is a more again a common mood. It's better to collaborate, it's better to talk to each other, and it's better to form in the business world, kind of international business community. It could be possible to think in categories of having a cultural international community, a science international community, but we are talking about business, a global business community again, with less transaction costs, with more opportunities to collaborate, because this is not only more efficient and more economically promising, but also an important basis for doing politics and for meeting the huge and demanding issues politics have to meet currently.
Thank you very much, Martin Wansleben. It was my pleasure to have this discussion with you. You have a very busy schedule here in China, so thank you very much that you took the time, and hopefully a lot what we've discussed will happen in the future indeed.
Pleasure was all mine.